My sister-in-law and mother-in-law ganged up to humiliate me, like servant anniversary dinner husband. Okay, Reddit, deep breaths. I need to get this off my chest because I feel like I am going completely insane, and maybe some outside perspective will help. Or maybe you will all just tell me I am an idiot, which, honestly, I am starting to believe myself. Let us start with the basics. I am Lee, I am 30 years old, and my husband David is 33. We have been married for 5 years, together for about 8. We met in college, classic story, fell in love, the usual stuff. For the most part, things between David and I have been good. He is generally kind, funny, we share interests, but there is this massive, glaring issue: his family. Specifically, his mother, Judy, who is probably in her late 50s, and his younger sister, Olivia, who is 28. When I first met Judy and Olivia, things seemed okay. A little frosty maybe, but I figured that was just their way. Judy is definitely the matriarch type, very particular, likes things done her way. Olivia seemed nice enough, a bit spoiled perhaps, but who is not? David always described them as protective of him, especially after his dad passed away when he was a teenager. I tried to be understanding, always polite, brought gifts, helped out when I visited, the daughter-in-law trying to fit in routine. But over the years, especially after David and I got married and bought our own house, the dynamic shifted. It was subtle at first. Little comments about my cooking, not quite Judy's standard, of course. Remarks about how I decorated our house, maybe a bit too modern for their taste. Questions about my job, I work in marketing, and did I really need to work such long hours? Was David feeling neglected? Olivia would often chime in, usually echoing her mother or making little passive-aggressive digs disguised as jokes. Like, "Oh Lee, that dress is brave. I could never pull that off. Thanks, Olivia, I think." David usually laughed these things off. "Oh, that is just mom being mom," he would say. Or, "Olivia does not mean anything by it, she is just teasing." He would tell me I was being too sensitive, reading too much into things. And for a while I tried to believe him. I really did. I told myself I was lucky to have him, that all families have their quirks and I should just let it roll off my back. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But things got noticeably worse about 2 years ago when I got a significant promotion at work. It came with a nice raise, more responsibility, and frankly, I was incredibly proud of myself. I had worked really hard for it. David seemed happy for me, at least initially, but Judy and Olivia, their reactions were weird. Instead of congratulations, I got comments like, "Well, I hope you will still have time for David, dear." Or from Olivia, "Wow, big shot now, huh? Are you going to be too busy to come to family dinners?" There was this undercurrent of resentment, almost like my success was somehow an affront to them. From then on, the servant treatment really kicked into high gear. Whenever they came over to our house, which became more frequent somehow, there was an expectation that I would wait on them hand and foot. It was not just offering drinks or snacks, which I happily do for any guest. It was demands. "Lee, fetch me a blanket, I am chilly." "Lee, the remote is over there, can you get it?" "Lee, make us some coffee, but use the French press this time, not that awful machine." Judy would critique my cleaning, running a finger over a surface and tutting. Olivia would lounge on the sofa scrolling through her phone, occasionally barking an order or making a snide remark about the state of the magazines or whatever. And David. He would usually be in the room, maybe watching television or chatting with them, completely oblivious or maybe willfully ignorant. If I hesitated or looked annoyed, Judy would sigh dramatically and say something like, "Oh dear, are we bothering you? We can just leave if we are too much trouble," which of course would prompt David to jump in and reassure them, "No, no, Mom, of course not. Lee is happy to help, right, Lee?" Putting me on the spot. So I would plaster on a smile and fetch the damn blanket or make the stupid coffee. I tried talking to David about it multiple times. I explained how it made me feel disrespected, undervalued, like unpaid help in my own home. He would listen, sometimes nod, but ultimately fall back on his usual excuses. They do not mean it that way. They are just used to being looked after. It is their generation. Mom has high standards. Olivia is just immature. He never seemed to grasp how hurtful and demeaning it was. He never offered to talk to them, to set boundaries. He just wanted me to keep the peace, to not rock the boat. His loyalty, it seemed, was always with them first. It chipped away at me, Reddit, little by little. I started dreading their visits. My stomach would clench when David said his mom or sister was popping over. I felt constantly on edge in my own house, anticipating the next criticism, the next demand. I found myself making excuses not to host things, suggesting we meet at restaurants or their places instead, but they always seemed to prefer our house. Maybe because they had a built-in waitress. Okay, so that brings us to the main event. Our 5th wedding anniversary was coming up. I initially wanted to go away, just David and me, maybe a nice weekend trip. But David suggested we have a small dinner party at our place instead. He said his mom and sister really wanted to celebrate with us. My heart sank, but I reluctantly agreed. I thought, okay, maybe this time will be different. It is our anniversary, surely they can be civil for one evening. Oh, how wrong I was. I decided to go all out. I planned a nice menu, David's favorite steak, my supposedly decent mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, a fancy dessert I saw online. I spent the day cleaning, decorating, setting the table nicely. I wanted it to be special, despite my reservations about the guest list, which included Judy, Olivia, and David's Uncle Mark, who is generally a decent guy but very quiet. The evening started predictably. Judy arrived, scanned the living room, and immediately pointed out a tiny watermark on the coffee table I must have missed. Olivia waltzed in, glanced at the appetizers I had laid out, and asked if I had remembered her specific dietary restrictions this time, even though she changes them every other week. I gritted my teeth and said yes, I had made sure there were options for her. Dinner itself was tense. Judy picked at her food, offering unsolicited advice on how I should have seasoned the steak. She claimed my mashed potatoes were lumpy, even though they looked perfectly smooth to me. Olivia spent most of the meal texting under the table, occasionally looking up to offer a backhanded compliment. "Oh, Lee, this dessert looks ambitious. Did you make it yourself?" When I confirmed I did, she just gave a little smirk and went back to her phone. David, meanwhile, was chatting away with his Uncle Mark, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents. Or maybe he just chose to ignore them as usual. Uncle Mark, bless him, tried to steer the conversation to neutral territory a few times, complimenting the food and asking about our jobs, but Judy and Olivia always managed to bring it back to subtle criticisms of me or our life. The real horror show started after dinner. I had cleared the main course plates and brought out the dessert and coffee. We were sitting in the living room. Judy finished her coffee and placed the empty cup on the side table. "Lee dear," she said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "be a love and get me another coffee, would you? And maybe clear away these dessert plates while you are up." Before I could even react, Olivia chimed in, "Yeah, Lee, and can you grab me a glass of water? Oh, and maybe see if you have any of those little chocolate mints. Mom loves those." They were talking to me like I was the hired help, not a request but an order, in front of David and his uncle. At my own anniversary dinner party that I had planned, cooked, and hosted, something inside me just snapped. All those years of biting my tongue, of swallowing their insults, of David's dismissiveness, it all just boiled over. I stood up slowly. I looked at Judy, then at Olivia, their expectant faces like it was the most natural thing in the world for me to jump up and serve them. I looked at David. He was looking uncomfortable finally, but still silent. He was just watching them humiliate me, and I just lost it, not shouting, not screaming, but my voice was shaking with anger. I said, "No, I am not getting you anything. I am not your maid. This is my home and it is my anniversary. I cooked, I cleaned, I hosted. The least you could do is show some basic respect, or at least get your own damn coffee." The silence that followed was deafening. Judy's jaw dropped. Olivia looked genuinely shocked, like I had just sprouted a second head. Uncle Mark suddenly found his shoes incredibly interesting. David finally spoke, his voice tight. "Lee," he hissed, "what are you doing? Calm down, calm down." I turned to him then, and I think that was the moment he realized I was serious. "I'm not calming down, David. I am done. I am done being treated like dirt by your mother and sister in my own house, and I am done with you letting them do it. You sit there and watch them mock me, order me around, criticize everything I do. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" Judy found her voice then. "Well, I never," she sputtered, "the disrespect. After all we do for you, all you do for me," I asked, incredulous. "What exactly is it that you do for me, Judy? Besides criticize my cooking, my cleaning, my career, and treat me like a servant?" Olivia jumped in to defend her mother. "You are being completely unreasonable, Lee. We were just asking for coffee. You are blowing this way out of proportion. You are always so dramatic." "Dramatic?" I repeated. "You demand I fetch things for you like a waitress, you constantly undermine me, you mock my efforts right to my face, and I am being dramatic for finally calling you out on it. No, Olivia. This ends now." I looked back at David. His face was pale. I think he finally understood this was not just another minor disagreement I would get over. This was different. "Lee, please," he started, "let us just talk about this later. Not in front of everyone." "No, David," I said, my voice steadier now. "We needed to talk about this years ago. But you never wanted to. You always chose protecting their feelings over mine. You always chose keeping the peace over standing up for your wife. So we are talking about it now. Either things change, fundamentally change, starting with you telling your mother and sister that their behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated anymore, or we have a much bigger problem than just a ruined anniversary dinner." Judy gasped. Olivia scoffed. Uncle Mark looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. David just stared at me, speechless. I told Judy and Olivia that the party was over and they needed to leave my house. Judy started protesting, saying she could not believe the audacity, but I just stood my ground, pointing towards the door. Olivia grabbed her purse, shot me a look that could kill, and muttered something about me being a crazy bitch under her breath as she followed her mother out. David made a half-hearted attempt to smooth things over, but they were having none of it. The door slammed shut behind them. Then it was just me, David, and Uncle Mark in the suddenly very quiet living room. Uncle Mark cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, Lee, David," he said, "I should probably be getting along too. Thanks for the dinner, Lee, it was lovely." He gave me a sympathetic look before quickly making his exit, and then there were two. David finally turned to me, a mixture of anger, confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Lee," he said, his voice low, "did you really have to do that? Did you have to blow everything up like that?" "Yes, David," I replied, meeting his gaze, "I really did, because I cannot live like this anymore. I cannot keep pretending it is okay. It is not okay. And the bigger question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to keep letting them treat me this way, or are you finally going to be my husband, my partner, and stand with me?" He did not have an answer then. He just stood there looking lost. I told him I needed space and went upstairs to the guest room. I packed a small bag. I did not know where I was going, maybe a hotel, maybe my sister's place across town. As I came downstairs, David was sitting on the bottom step, his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I need some time to think, David," I said softly. "Away from here, away from them. And you need time to think too. You need to decide whose side you are really on, because you cannot have it both ways anymore." I walked out the door, leaving him sitting there. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but also, strangely, the most liberating. I felt this enormous weight lift off my shoulders. I did not know what the future held, whether my marriage was salvageable, but I knew I could not go back to the way things were. I finally stood up for myself, and whatever happened next, that felt like a victory. So Reddit, that is where I am right now, staying at my sister's place trying to figure out my next steps. David has been texting and calling, saying he is sorry, that he wants to fix things, that he realizes how badly he messed up by not supporting me. But I do not know if I can trust him. I do not know if he is capable of truly changing or standing up to Judy and Olivia long term. Am I the asshole for blowing up my anniversary dinner and potentially my marriage over this? Or was it long overdue? What would you do in my situation? Update 1. Wow, okay. I honestly did not expect this post to get so much attention. Thank you all so much for the overwhelming support and validation. Reading through your comments, realizing how many people have dealt with similar mother-in-law or sister-in-law nightmares, it really made me feel less alone and less crazy. A lot of you shared stories that made my jaw drop, for real. It seems like toxic in-laws are practically a universal experience, which is depressing but also strangely comforting. Many of you said I was absolutely not the asshole and that my reaction was long overdue. Thank you. It means a lot to hear that, especially when I have been second-guessing myself for so long, wondering if I was just being overly sensitive like David, Judy, and Olivia always claimed. Some of you called David spineless, an enabler, or worse, and while that was harsh to read about my husband, I cannot honestly say you are wrong based on his past behavior. So, what happened next? Well, I stayed at my sister's place for about a week. It was good to have the space and her support. She was furious on my behalf, by the way. She had witnessed some of Judy and Olivia's behavior over the years and had told me multiple times I needed to put my foot down, so she was basically like, finally. During that week, David and I communicated mostly through text at first. He apologized profusely. He said seeing me actually walk out finally made him realize the gravity of the situation. how much pain he had allowed his mother and sister to inflict on me, and how much he had failed me as a husband by not protecting me or prioritizing our relationship. He acknowledged that his default mode was to avoid conflict with them, but that he saw now how damaging that was to me and to us. He asked if we could talk in person properly. I was hesitant. Part of me wanted to just cut my losses, convinced he would never truly change. But another part, the part that still loved him and remembered the good times before his family's interference became unbearable, wanted to give him one last chance. A lot of you in the comments suggested couples counseling, and I agreed that had to be a non-negotiable condition if we were even going to attempt reconciliation. So, I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe. He looked awful, like he had not slept much. He reiterated his apologies, but this time it felt different. He did not make excuses for Judy or Olivia. He did not minimize my feelings. He owned his part in it completely. He said, "Lee, I was a coward. I let my fear of upsetting them override my responsibility to you. I saw what was happening, and I chose to look away, or worse, I took their side. There is no excuse for that. I broke your trust, and I understand if you cannot forgive me. But I want to try. I want to earn your trust back. I want us back, but things have to change. I have to change." He told me he had already had a very difficult conversation with Judy and Olivia. Apparently it did not go well, which, frankly, did not surprise me. He said he told them, point blank, that their treatment of me was unacceptable, disrespectful, and had severely damaged his marriage. He told them that until they could genuinely apologize to me and commit to treating me with kindness and respect as his wife and an equal member of the family, they would not be welcome in our home, and his contact with them would be limited. According to David, Judy reacted with tears and accusations of betrayal, saying I had turned him against his own family. Olivia apparently went on the attack, calling me manipulative and trying to convince David I was the problem. But David said he stood firm. He told them his priority was his wife and his marriage, and their behavior needed to change, period. He said it was one of the hardest things he had ever done, confronting them like that, but he knew it was necessary. He then told me he had already researched and found a couples therapist specializing in family dynamics and boundary setting. He had booked an initial consultation and asked if I would be willing to go with him. He said he was also willing to go to individual therapy to understand why he allowed this dynamic to persist for so long. Hearing all this, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and knowing he had actually taken concrete steps, not just made empty promises, it made me pause. It was more than I expected. It was what I had needed him to do years ago. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope. I did not agree to move back home immediately. I told him I appreciated him taking these steps, especially talking to his mom and sister and booking therapy. I agreed to go to the initial counseling session with him, but I needed more time. I needed to see consistent change, not just a reaction born out of panic because I left. I needed to know this was real. He accepted that. He did not push. He said he understood and would do whatever it took for however long it took. We finished our coffee, and it was the first time in a long time that I felt a glimmer of hope for us. It was still fragile, but it was there. So, that is the first update. We have our first therapy session scheduled for next week. I'm still at my sister's. Judy and Olivia have apparently been blowing up David's phone, alternating between angry voicemails and tearful guilt trips, but he says he is holding firm on the boundaries he set. I am cautiously optimistic, but also prepared for this to potentially still fall apart. I guess we will see. Thank you again, Reddit, for listening and for the advice. It really helped me clarify what I needed. Update 2. Hello again, Reddit. It has been a few months since my last update, and things have definitely continued to evolve. First off, thank you again for the continued support and messages. Knowing so many strangers were rooting for me genuinely helped during some tough moments. And yes, some friends did recognize the story, despite changed details, haha. Thankfully, they were incredibly supportive. So where are things now? David and I started couples counseling as planned. And let me tell you, it has been intense. Our therapist is great, very direct but fair. We have unpacked a lot, not just about the issues with his family, but also about our communication patterns, conflict avoidance, mostly his, but sometimes mine too, and underlying expectations in our marriage. David has been actively participating, which I appreciate. He is doing the work. He has admitted how deep his fear of conflict with his mother ran, stemming from his childhood and feeling responsible for her emotional well-being after his father died. He recognized how he transferred that dynamic onto our relationship, prioritizing keeping Judy and Olivia happy, or at least placated, over supporting me. It does not excuse his behavior, but understanding the root cause has been helpful for both of us. He is also attending individual therapy, which I think is making a big difference. One of the biggest breakthroughs came when the therapist had us do an exercise focusing on loyalty and boundaries. It really forced David to confront the reality that his lack of boundaries with his family was a fundamental betrayal of our marriage vows. Seeing it laid out like that seemed to hit him hard. He apologized again, and this time it felt like he truly grasped the depth of the hurt he had caused. As for Judy and Olivia, well, it has been rocky. As David mentioned in the first update, his initial boundary-setting conversation did not go over well. They continued to try and manipulate him, blaming me entirely for the rift. Olivia apparently sent him lengthy texts detailing all my supposed flaws and how I was poisoning him against them. Judy tried the guilt trip route, lamenting how lonely she was and how could he abandon his poor mother. David, to his credit, held firm. He did not engage with the attacks on me. He repeated his position. Their behavior towards me needed to change. They needed to apologize sincerely, and until then, contact would remain limited, and they were not welcome in our home. He blocked Olivia for a while when her texts became too abusive. He kept conversations with Judy brief and focused, refusing to get drawn into arguments or guilt trips. This went on for about 2 months. It was hard on David, I could see that, but he stuck to it. He kept saying our marriage and my well-being were his priority now. And honestly, Reddit, seeing him consistently choose me, over avoiding conflict with them. That started to rebuild my trust piece by piece. Around the 3-month mark, something shifted. Maybe they realized David was serious this time. Judy called him, sounding calmer. She asked if they could meet, just her and David, to talk. He agreed cautiously. According to David, she offered a sort of apology. It was not perfect. Apparently there was still some defensiveness. I did not mean it like that, but she did acknowledge that her behavior towards me had been hurtful and disrespectful. She admitted she was perhaps jealous of my relationship with David and my independence. She said she missed him and wanted to mend things. She asked if she could apologize to me directly. David told her he appreciated her reaching out, but an apology needed to be sincere and unconditional. He also said Olivia needed to be part of that apology, as she was equally culpable. Judy agreed to talk to Olivia. A week later, David received a joint text from both of them, formally requesting to meet with both David and me to apologize. We discussed it in therapy. Our therapist advised us to proceed cautiously, to manage our expectations, and to have clear boundaries in place for the meeting itself. She helped us outline what a genuine apology would look like and what our response would be if it fell short. So we agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a quiet park pavilion. I was nervous, not going to lie. David held my hand the whole way there. Judy and Olivia were already waiting. They both looked subdued. Judy spoke first. She looked me in the eye and said, "Lee, I want to apologize. I behaved terribly towards you. I was critical, demanding, and deeply disrespectful, especially at your anniversary dinner, but also for a long time before that. There is no excuse for it. I was wrong. I hope in time you can forgive me." Then Olivia spoke. She also apologized, admitting she had been catty, passive-aggressive, and had joined her mother in treating me poorly. She said she realized how unwelcoming and hurtful she had been. Her apology felt a little less practiced than Judy's, maybe more genuinely awkward, but it seemed sincere. David then reiterated our position. He said we appreciated their apologies, but rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort on their part. He laid out clear boundaries for future interactions. No more demands, no unsolicited criticism, respectful communication always. Any hint of the old behavior, and the visit or conversation would end immediately, and contact would be limited again. He made it clear that I was his wife. The relationship came first, and any disrespect towards me was disrespect towards him. They both agreed to these terms. Judy actually teared up a bit and said she just wanted her son back and understood things had to change. Olivia nodded along. Since that meeting a few weeks ago, interactions have been careful, tentative. We have had a couple of short phone calls, one brief coffee visit at a cafe, not our house yet. Judy and Olivia have been almost overly polite, very conscious of the new boundaries. It is weird, honestly, but it is infinitely better than before. Will it last? I do not know. Old habits die hard. but for the first time there is a path forward that does not involve me being treated like garbage. David and I are still in therapy, and we have decided I will move back home next week. He has shown me, through consistent action, that he is committed to changing and prioritizing our marriage. He is not the same man who stood by and watched me be humiliated. He actively manages interactions with his family now, shielding me from potential issues and shutting down anything inappropriate immediately. Our communication is better, our partnership feels stronger. It is not perfect, we still have work to do, but we are doing it together. It feels like we weathered a massive storm and came out the other side, battered but intact, and maybe even stronger for it. And I came out of it knowing I have the strength to stand up for myself, no matter what. That feeling is priceless. So Reddit, I guess this is the final update for now. Things are looking up. Cautiously optimistic is still the phrase of the day, but it feels more optimistic than cautious now. Thank you all again for being my sounding board and cheerleading section. It made a world of difference. I suppose the question now isn't AITAH, but maybe, did I do the right thing by giving David and maybe even his family another chance under these new circumstances? What do you think? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.